What if I told you that sometimes the most devastating revenge doesn't come with violence, screaming, or confrontation? What if I told you that the most brilliant payback happens in silence? Planned for years, executed with surgical precision? Today, I'm going to tell you about Sarah Martinez, a woman from Phoenix, Arizona, who turned betrayal into the most sophisticated revenge plot I've ever heard of. And every single word of this story is true. Sarah Martinez thought she had it all figured out at 32. She was living the American dream in a beautiful suburban home in Scottsdale, married to her college sweetheart, David, who worked as a successful real estate developer. They'd been together for 12 years, married for 8. And Sarah had spent the last 5 years of her life building something she was incredibly proud of, her own boutique marketing agency. Now, let me paint you a picture of Sarah. She wasn't your typical revenge story protagonist. She was the kind of woman who organized neighborhood barbecues, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who brought homemade cookies to the office every Friday. Her friends described her as someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. Her marketing agency, Phoenix Creative Solutions, was her baby. She'd started it in their garage with a $5,000 loan from her grandmother. Working 18-hour days, sacrificing vacations, date nights, even her own health to make it work. But here's what made Sarah special: she was brilliant at reading people. That's what made her such a successful marketer. She could look at someone and understand exactly what they wanted, what they feared, what motivated them. She could craft campaigns that didn't just sell products. They sold dreams, emotions, entire lifestyles. Her client roster included some of the biggest names in Arizona: politicians, luxury car dealerships, high-end restaurants. Sarah had a gift, and by 2019, her little garage startup was pulling in over $2 million a year. David seemed supportive, at least on the surface. He'd brag about his entrepreneurial wife at dinner parties, post proud husband photos on Facebook. But Sarah started noticing little things. How he'd change the subject when she talked about work. How he'd roll his eyes when she had to take important calls during dinner. How he'd make jokes about her being married to her business. That stung a little too much to be funny. Then there was Jessica Chen, Sarah's business partner and best friend since college. Jessica was everything Sarah wasn't: outgoing where Sarah was thoughtful, impulsive where Sarah was strategic. They complemented each other perfectly. Jessica handled the creative side, while Sarah managed operations and client relations. They were like sisters, spending more time together than Sarah spent with her own husband. The three of them, Sarah, David, and Jessica, were inseparable. They took vacations together, spent every weekend together, celebrated every holiday as a trio. David and Jessica got along great. Maybe a little too great, but Sarah never thought anything of it. After all, these were the two people she trusted most in the world. The first crack in Sarah's perfect world appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2020. Just as the pandemic was shutting everything down. She was working from home, like everyone else, when she realized she'd left some important client files at the office. The city was in lockdown, the streets were empty. But Sarah needed those contracts signed by morning. She drove to her office building, used her keycard, and took the elevator up to the 12th floor. Phoenix Creative Solutions occupied a beautiful corner suite, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert. Sarah was proud of this office. She'd designed every detail herself. As she walked down the hallway toward her office, she heard something that made her freeze. Voices, coming from Jessica's office. That was weird. Jessica was supposed to be at home with her family, and the building was supposed to be completely empty. Sarah crept closer, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "We can't keep doing this here," Jessica was saying. "What if Sarah finds out?" "Sarah's not going to find out anything," came the reply. A man's voice. A familiar voice. "She's so buried in spreadsheets and client calls. She barely notices what's happening in her own house, let alone the office." It was David, her husband, in Jessica's office. At night, during lockdown, Sarah's hands started shaking. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. "I feel terrible about this," Jessica continued. "She trusts us completely. Both of us. Look, Jess, we've talked about this 100 times. Sarah and I. We're roommates at this point. We haven't been happy in years. She cares more about this business than she does about our marriage. At least with you, I feel alive again. Sarah covered her mouth to keep from gasping. Her husband and her best friend. Having an affair. In her office. The office she'd built from nothing. But then Jessica said something that hit Sarah like a physical blow. I know, but David, what we're planning. Taking over the business like this. It feels like we're stealing her life. We're not stealing anything, David replied. And Sarah could hear him moving around. Look at these contracts. Look at this client list. Sarah built something incredible, but she's terrible at the business side. Always has been. We can run this company so much better than she can. And legally, I have just as much right to it as she does. What do you mean? Community property laws, baby. When we get divorced, I get half of everything Sarah built. And if you and I are partners in the new version of the company, well, Sarah becomes the minority stakeholder in her own business. Sarah felt like she was going to throw up. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to steal her company. The business she'd sacrificed everything for. The dream she'd built with her own hands. She listened for another few minutes, learning the full scope of their plan. David had been secretly documenting every business decision Sarah made, building a case that she was an irresponsible business owner. Jessica had been copying client files, making lists of contact information. Even reaching out to some clients to test the waters about potentially moving their business to a new agency. They were going to blindside her with divorce papers and a hostile takeover simultaneously. She'd lose her husband, her best friend, and her business all at once. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Because Sarah didn't confront them. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't immediately call a lawyer. Instead, she did something much more dangerous. She went home, sat in her kitchen, and she planned. You have to understand, Sarah's superpower was understanding people's motivations, their weaknesses, their blind spots. And she'd just learned that the two people closest to her had a massive blind spot. They completely underestimated her. Sarah realized that David and Jessica saw her as this naive, business-obsessed woman who was too trusting and too focused on work to notice what was happening around her. They thought she was weak. They thought she was predictable. They had no idea who they were messing with. Over the next 6 months, while David and Jessica continued their affair and their plotting, Sarah began executing the most methodical, brilliant revenge plan I've ever encountered. And the beautiful thing was, they never saw it coming because Sarah never changed her behavior. She continued being the same loving wife, the same trusting business partner. She brought Jessica coffee every morning. She kissed David goodbye every day. She acted exactly like the woman they thought she was. But behind the scenes, Sarah was working. First, she hired a private investigator not to document the affair, but to investigate David's real estate business. She had a hunch that someone willing to cheat on his wife and steal her business might be cutting other corners too. She was right. The PI discovered that David had been involved in some shady dealings. Inflating property values, hiding defects from buyers, even skimming money from investor accounts. Nothing that would land him in prison, but definitely enough to destroy his reputation and his business license. Next, Sarah started quietly diversifying her client relationships. She began reaching out to competitors of her current clients, building relationships, expanding her network. Jessica thought Sarah was just being her usual workaholic self, but Sarah was actually preparing to rebuild her entire business from scratch if necessary. But Sarah's masterstroke was psychological. She started feeding David and Jessica false information about the business. She'd casually mention fake financial problems, pretend to struggle with client relationships that were actually rock solid, even staged a few phone calls where she appeared to be losing major accounts. David and Jessica ate it up. They became convinced that Sarah was running the business into the ground, and that their takeover plan would actually be a rescue mission. They got cocky. They got sloppy. The revenge began on a Friday in October 2020. Sarah had been planning this day for 7 months, choreographing every detail like a conductor preparing for the performance of a lifetime. That morning, David left for what he thought was a routine day, showing properties to clients. But Sarah had arranged for him to arrive at one of his developments, to find a team of state investigators waiting for him. The private investigator had turned over evidence of David's shady business practices to the Arizona Department of Real Estate. And they were there to serve him with papers suspending his license pending a full investigation. While David was dealing with that crisis, Sarah walked into the office and asked Jessica to join her in the conference room for their regular Friday strategy meeting. Jessica came in carrying her laptop and a coffee, completely unsuspecting. "Jess," Sarah said, closing the door behind them, "we need to talk." "Sure, what's up?" Jessica replied, settling into her usual chair. Sarah opened her own laptop and turned the screen toward Jessica. On it was a compilation of security footage from their office building. Footage of David and Jessica entering and leaving together after hours. Footage of them in intimate situations in Jessica's office, footage going back months. Jessica's face went white. "Sarah, I can explain." "No need," Sarah said calmly. "I've known for 7 months." Jessica started crying, started apologizing, started begging. But Sarah wasn't done. "I also know about your plan to take over the business. I know about the client list you've been copying. I know about the calls you've made behind my back." Sarah pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. "These are copies of every email you've sent from your company account for the past year. Every client contact you've made. Every file you've copied. Everything." Jessica was hyperventilating now. "Sarah, please, let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued, her voice steady as ice. "You're going to resign from Phoenix Creative Solutions, effective immediately. You're going to sign this non-compete agreement that prevents you from working with any of our clients for the next 5 years. And you're going to return every piece of company property, every client file, every password and access code. And if I don't?" Sarah smiled for the first time in the conversation. "Then I release all of this evidence to every marketing agency in Phoenix, along with a detailed report of how you tried to steal proprietary client information. You'll never work in this industry again." Jessica signed the papers with shaking hands. But Sarah was just getting started. While Jessica was cleaning out her desk, Sarah was making phone calls. She called every single client that Jessica had secretly contacted over the past months. But instead of warning them about Jessica's betrayal, she did something much more clever. She told each client that Jessica had been offered an amazing opportunity at a competitor and would be leaving Phoenix Creative Solutions, but that Sarah was so grateful for Jessica's contributions that she was personally going to handle all of Jessica's accounts moving forward, giving each client her direct personal attention. The clients were thrilled. They felt special, valued, like they were getting upgraded service. Sarah had turned Jessica's attempted betrayal into a customer service win. Then Sarah called David. "Honey," she said sweetly when he answered, "how's your day going?" David was in the middle of the worst professional crisis of his life, surrounded by investigators and lawyers. But he couldn't tell Sarah that because he'd been lying to her about his business practices for years. "It's fine," he lied. "Just a busy day." "That's great, sweetheart. Listen, I'm going to be working late tonight. Jessica had a family emergency and had to leave town suddenly. So I'm handling all her accounts now." "Oh, okay," David said, distracted. "Love you," Sarah said, and hung up. That evening, Sarah worked alone in her office. But she wasn't handling client accounts. She was executing the final phase of her plan. Over the weekend, David tried desperately to reach Jessica, but she wasn't answering his calls. He had no idea that Sarah had convinced Jessica to take a job with a marketing firm in Denver, effectively removing her from the equation entirely. On Monday morning, David came home to find Sarah sitting at their kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a manila envelope. "Morning, honey," she said brightly. "Coffee?" David was confused. Sarah seemed happy, happier than she'd been in months. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse. "David, we need to talk," Sarah said, sliding the envelope across the table. Inside were divorce papers, but not the kind David had been expecting. These weren't the papers of a blindsided, emotional wife. These were the papers of someone who had been planning for months. "I know about Jessica," Sarah said simply. David's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "I know about your plan to take the business. I know about the fake financial crisis you've been hoping for. I know about your real estate license suspension. I know everything. David tried to speak, but Sarah held up a hand. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign these divorce papers, which give you exactly nothing. No alimony, no share of the business. No claim to any assets acquired during our marriage. Sarah, you can't do that. Community property laws don't apply when one spouse can prove the other committed fraud and attempted to steal marital assets. Sarah interrupted. I have 7 months of documentation proving you tried to systematically destroy and steal my business. Any judge in Arizona will throw out your community property claims. David stared at her in shock. This wasn't the woman he thought he knew. But wait, there's more, Sarah continued. And David could swear he heard a smile in her voice. Remember those real estate deals you've been working on? The ones where you inflated property values and hid structural problems from buyers? David's blood ran cold. I've sent detailed reports to every one of those buyers, along with evidence of your fraudulent practices. You're going to be facing lawsuits from about 15 different families who trusted you with the biggest purchase of their lives. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Sarah pulled out her phone and played a recording. It was David's voice, talking to Jessica, about how he'd massaged some numbers on a property appraisal and hidden foundation problems from a young couple buying their first home. You've been recording us? For months. Every conversation, every phone call, every text message. Did you know that in Arizona, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation? I consented to all of them. David realized, with growing horror, that he'd been completely outplayed. But Sarah wasn't finished. Oh, and David? Remember how you thought I was a terrible businesswoman? How you were convinced that Jessica and you could run Phoenix Creative Solutions so much better than me? David nodded numbly. Well, while you two were planning your little coup, I was expanding. I signed 12 new clients in the past 6 months. I've increased revenue by 40%. And yesterday, I got a call from a venture capital firm in California. They want to invest $8 million in Phoenix Creative Solutions to help me expand nationwide. David's mouth fell open. Turns out, all those financial problems you thought you were observing? That was me reinvesting profits into growth. All those client relationship issues you thought you were witnessing? That was me being selective about which accounts were worth keeping. All those late nights and weekend calls you resented? That was me building an empire. Sarah stood up from the table. You thought I was weak, David. You thought I was naive. You thought I was so focused on work that I couldn't see what was happening in my own life. But the truth is, I saw everything. I just decided you weren't worth interrupting my success for. The fallout was swift and brutal. David signed the divorce papers the same day. With his real estate license suspended and facing multiple lawsuits, he couldn't afford a legal battle he was guaranteed to lose. He moved in with his brother in Tucson and last I heard, he was working at a Home Depot. Jessica never returned from Denver. She took a job with a small marketing firm there, making about a quarter of what she used to make at Phoenix Creative Solutions. Sarah's non-compete agreement meant she couldn't work with any major clients for 5 years, effectively destroying her career in marketing. But here's the most beautiful part of Sarah's revenge. She didn't just destroy her enemies. She elevated herself. Phoenix Creative Solutions became one of the fastest-growing marketing agencies in the Southwest. Sarah opened offices in Denver, Austin, and San Diego. She hired 23 employees. She won industry awards. She was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. And every success felt like another twist of the knife. To the people who had tried to steal her life, the private investigator who helped Sarah uncover David's fraud, she hired him full-time as her head of corporate security. The lawyer who handled her divorce, he became her corporate counsel and eventually a close friend. Sarah even kept the office building where she'd discovered David and Jessica's betrayal. But she renovated Jessica's old office into something special. A conference room she calls the Trust Room, where she meets with new clients and employees to discuss the importance of loyalty and integrity in business relationships. Today, Sarah Martinez runs a $15 million company. She remarried 2 years ago to a man who celebrates her success instead of resenting it. She travels the world, speaks at business conferences, and mentors young entrepreneurs. But if you ask Sarah about her revenge on David and Jessica, she'll tell you something interesting. She'll say it wasn't really about punishment. It was about justice. They saw me as weak, she told me when I interviewed her for this story. They thought they could take advantage of my trust, my kindness, my love. But they made one crucial mistake. They confused kindness with weakness. They confused trust with naivety. They forgot that the same intelligence I used to build a successful business could be used to protect it. Sarah's story is a reminder that sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't loud or violent or immediate. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it's strategic. Sometimes it's so perfectly executed that your enemies destroy themselves while you build something beautiful from the ashes of their betrayal. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success. If you enjoyed this story of brilliant, calculated justice, make sure to subscribe for more true stories of people who refused to be victims. And let me know in the comments, was Sarah's revenge justified? Or did she go too far? I'll see you in the next video.